And then a principled aesthetic disagreement over the length of my hair in a chalk drawing was decided by a bite. But dinner was lively, the ice cream bribery effective, and after story time, poem time, I love you time, I slipped out of the room without a fuss. About an hour later, though, I looked up to find my blonde-haired, blue-eyed, scarily intelligent sprite of a child, Eliza, standing in the doorway. "Daddy," she said, "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I'm seeing terrible things." I'm a lifelong insomniac. I used to freak my own parents out when I was a small child by creeping quietly into their room and opening up their eyelids with my fingers in an effort, so the story goes, to see what they were dreaming. And in fact, I began this very essay between 2 and 4 one morning when my thoughts were all a case of knives, to quote the great 17th century poet and priest George Herbert. So I was sympathetic to my daughter's plight. I suggested she pray to God. This was a moment of either great grace or brazen hypocrisy. Not that the two can't coincide. As I'm not a great prayer myself and tend to be either undermined by irony or overwhelmed by my own chaotic consciousness. Nevertheless, I suggested that my little girl get down on her knees and bow her head and ask God to give her good thoughts, like the old family house in Tennessee that we'd gone to just a couple of weeks earlier, for example. The huge green yard with its warlock willows and mystery thickets, the river with its primordial snapping turtles and water-bearded cattle, the buckets of just-picked blueberries and the fried Krispy Kremes, and the fireflies smearing their alien radiance through the humid Tennessee twilight. I told her to hold that image in her head and ask God to preserve it for her. I suggested she let the force of her longing and the fact of God's love coalesce into a form as intact and atomic as matter itself, to attend to memory with the painstaking attentiveness of the poet, the abraded patience of the saint, the visionary innocence of the child whose unwilled wonder erases any distinction between her days and her dreams. I said all this, underneath my actual words, as it were, and waited while all that blonde-haired, blue-eyed intelligence took it in. "Oh, I don't think so, Daddy." She looked me right in the eyes. "What do you mean, Eliza? Why not?" "Because in Tennessee, I asked God to turn me into a unicorn, and—" She spread her arms wide in a disconcertingly adult and ironic shrug. "Look how that's worked out." What exactly does it mean to pray? And is it something one ought to be teaching a child to do? And if we assume for a moment that it is indeed an essential thing to learn, then what exactly ought one to pray for? A parking space? To be cured of some dread disease? For the emotional and spiritual well-being of a beloved child? To be a unicorn? For one night of untroubled sleep? The Polish poet Anna Kamieńska died in 1986 at the age of 66. She had converted to Christianity decades earlier, in her 30s, after the unexpected death of her beloved husband, the poet Jan Śpiewak. People who have been away from God tend to come back by one of two ways: extreme lack or extreme love, an overmastering sorrow or a strangely disabling joy. Either the world is not enough for the hole that is opened in you, or it is too much. The two impulses are intimately related, and it may be that the most authentic spiritual existence inheres in being able to perceive one state when you are squarely in the midst of the other. The mortal sorrow that shadows even the most intense joy. The immortal joy that can give even the darkest sorrow a fugitive gleam. Anna Kamieńska, then, a devoted and tormented Catholic, her faith brought her great comfort and great anguish, often at the same time. No doubt this is precisely the quality that attracted me to her when I first came across a couple of passages from her diaries, high in the air above downtown Chicago in Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Blood in my tubes and blades in my veins. I have cancer. I've been living with it, dying with it, for so long now that it bores me, or baffles me, or drives me into the furthest crannies of literature and theology in search of something that will both speak and spare my own pain. Were it not for my daughters, I think by this point I would be at peace with any outcome.